You're listening to a Jurassic Rewind here on the Jurassic Park Podcast, featuring interviews, fun segments, and more from our past. Enjoy. Let's open up the doors to the Visitor Center, where I speak with Mike Matessino about the recent John Williams Jurassic Park Collection from La La Land Records. So today in the Visitor Center, I'm joined by Mike Matessino, who you'll come to know as the man who produced, edited, and remastered the Jurassic Park and the Lost World soundtracks for the recent La La Land Records John Williams release. How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me.
Awesome, yeah, man, it's really exciting to have you on here, and I know a ton of people are very excited about this release and what you have to offer with it, and obviously, you know, John Williams is great, and these scores are great, so I'm sure we got a lot to talk about.
Sure, well, let's get to it.
All right, well, I'm going to start you off with a question, may not have anything to do with the scores, but it's a question I ask everybody that comes on here, so bear with me. If you're stuck in a kitchen with a Velociraptor, you know, just like that scene in Jurassic Park, what would you do, and would you make it out alive?
Oh, what would I do? I don't know how much. I could go on all day thinking answers to these kind of questions. I don't know. I probably. I really don't know. I mean, you ask everybody this question?
I do, yeah. And so nobody ever knows.
I probably wouldn't make it out alive. I don't know.
That's basically the conclusion I think everybody comes to, is it's kind of a tough situation, and there's probably not any getting out of it.
Yeah, because I guess you have to be 8 years old and limping, and have a smart older sister.
Yeah. It's the perfect, combination of things comes together to get out of that situation. Not everybody can do it, but there's always a little chance. So when it comes to Jurassic Park, why don't you tell us a little bit about your specific fandom when it comes to this movie?
Well, oddly enough, I'm not, a huge fan of them.
Okay.
I admire the movies tremendously. But I wouldn't say that they are in my top favorites at all. But I always enjoy them. They're a lot of fun. They're a mixture of science and adventure. So Michael Crichton really came up with just this terrific concept in which he was able to explore some of his themes that he always did in a lot of his work, which is, can you really go up against nature, and can you really control science and technology? He keeps coming back to those themes, and they're always relevant and always valid. So therefore, the concept is really compelling. And then on the first two movies, you've got them directed by Steven Spielberg. So they're interesting movies from just a filmmaking standpoint to study, and especially in the context of where he was in his career at that time and what he did, before and after those films. But my experience with it was more about how the breakthrough of the technology that made it possible to make Jurassic Park the way it was made, coming at that point in time. And I had to actually think back to the time when the movie opened in writing the liner notes about it and trying to bring things into context, that this was really sort of real groundbreaking moment in digital technology for cinema as well, not only for visual effects, but for theater sound. It really, at the time, the internet was just getting started on a wide range. I mean, we all remember 1994, I think, was the famous clip with Katie Couric saying, "Can you tell me what internet is?" So, I mean, it was a different era. People don't realize how fast everything has changed in the 23 years now since Jurassic Park opened. Yeah. It was a completely different world, and so I was trying to capture a little bit of that. I had the very profound sense at the time that we were crossing a threshold. And look how movie theaters have changed, how the way we watch movies have changed. So that it was that profound sense of crossing a threshold that I tried to capture. That's what I think of when I think of Jurassic Park.
Yeah, and you're right. It's just the combination of everything, and you have Steven Spielberg, John Williams, and that CGI aspect that's just coming into the fold. So much coming together to make these movies awesome. And if whether you like them or not, you can't really deny that it changed like the film industry, and it's full of great people putting it together.
Right, and I mean, it was one of the first big summer blockbusters that actually had international gross outseated the gross in the U.S., which was astounding to the industry at the time. They, didn't expect that, and it shifted everything about marketing, about merchandising. I mean, it changed every area of the business. It had an impact.
Yeah, Steven Spielberg talks a lot right now about how the industry's changing and where he sees like theaters going in the near future. But he was at the forefront of that all the way back then, changing things and making things new for everybody.
Right. At the same time, he was not. You don't think about that while you're trying to get a movie made. You're just trying to think about how do I make the best movie, and how do you use all of the colors on your palette and apply them to telling a story. You don't say, well, I got this project's going to change the world. It's like you really don't know that till it's done, and it has to be sort of the perfect storm and come out at the perfect time and be marketed in the perfect way and sort of tap into the psyche of people in a certain way. And I mean, he hit this moment in time where there was this the fascination with dinosaurs was reasserting itself, and it just was a lightning in the bottle moment. Mm-hmm. In 1993.
Yeah. You mentioned those liner notes that you put together, and it's encased in this 56-page booklet. There's a ton of great information in there, insight. How much time and effort did you put into researching that part of the project?
Feels like quite a bit.
I'm sure.
I pick and choose what liner notes to write, and I'm now in the enviable position of Amblin asking me to write about all of the ones for Steven's pictures. But if I feel I'm not right for it, which was the case on AI, I can recommend that. But so I took it on, and I will start with, it's been covered on behind the scenes documentaries and things like that. So you've got a starting place. And then I always want to search for new things or things that aren't talked about as much. And so I'll hit the library, I'll go to the Academy, and I'll go through news clippings. I'll look at the trade announcements, I'll look at basically everything that they've got and try to just really capture the context of history, and maybe be able to incorporate things that don't get mentioned that often. Mm-hmm. Or in this case, shift the emphasis away from what a common thought is. For example, the CGI, which groundbreaking as it was, most of the time in the first Jurassic Park, you're not looking at CGI dinosaurs. Yeah. It's maybe 6.5 minutes of CGI work. And it's the mechanical dinosaurs that you're mostly looking at, which is just equally groundbreaking work. Mm-hmm. And then there's all the other things that there are to look at, such as just the thematic things in the screenplay and the other aspects we talked about, the sound and just the impact it made on the industry. So I mean, I'll try to go find the context and find something new. But I find it challenging because what you end up with is a document full of completely unrelated facts that then need to be organized, and it takes a long time. And on this, I kept having to go get a change of environment on it in order to have it flow and have it get my thoughts organized and whip the thing into shape. So it's like I go to my local library, or I'd go sit in a park, or I'd go sit in a restaurant. And then finally, it was starting to come into shape, and I went and spent an afternoon at the Burbank Public Library, and I pulled down Crichton's books, and I was flipping through them for just to kind of get the brain cells going. And I spent all afternoon there, and then I went to nice Italian restaurant in downtown Burbank that I like, and I went into the bar area, and I was there all evening, and had a really nice wine. And I'm like, well, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen here, because I'm right next door to the theater where I first saw Jurassic Park.
Oh, wow.
Although it's not the same theater. They tore that down and built a new one right across the street. And it's on San Fernando Boulevard, right at the place where the T-Rex goes on its rampage in the end of the Lost World. And
Perfect.
So sure enough, I left there that evening with a draft I was happy with, or at least something where it was all flowing and making sense. And then I was at the point where I can now edit and tweak. And so, but it was a while. So that was going on mostly in August, I believe. I think mostly in August is when that was going on. Okay. And it's always a great, satisfying experience, to come away and finally feel like your piece is making sense. And it's a nice break for me to switch from being in the studio working on audio to then doing the writing.
Oh yeah, I'm sure you get bogged down with, also staring at a screen, all the time, and having the headphones on or however you're doing it. It's just a lot of work. And this booklet here, it's full of so much information. So you really encapsulate, the very inception of these movies and the stories from Crichton and how they get made. And it's really an awesome piece. So, if anybody's, doubting to buy this, pick it up for this alone. That's well worth a read for the $59 it is. Yeah. So that's
definitely a premium item, and people who enjoy this, they might not want to admit that they actually have an expensive hobby, but these things are very, very costly to produce, and the profit margin is so low. So so a lot of love and care goes into it, and I always feel that we need to get it right. And admit it, you're doing you're doing the great composer John Williams for a Steven Spielberg movie. You got to just put everything you can at it and make it as good as it can possibly be, and appropriate for the success that entire series has enjoyed and continues to enjoy. Mm-hmm. So we had to get it right, and and I knew that everything gets reviewed. On this one, he actually wanted to read it, and
nice. Wow.
It's because his company actually owns the copyright on this property, and it's as continuing. Mm-hmm. So I always worry a little bit about that, and I sometimes go into, I like to put the stuff in context with his work, because you'll always find that some piece of his personality or what's going on in his life gets applied into every movie he makes. There's a personal stamp somewhere in there. So I put, again, to offer a greater context than just what might be commonly thought. Oh, Jurassic Park. Yeah, that's that movie they made in the 90s that brought us CG creatures. Well, no, it's a lot more than that. And of course, because in between the first two pictures was Schindler's List, I had to address that. Not in the way that I would if we were putting out an album of Schindler's List, but I had to, again, to put it in context of the importance of that film, and how the scheduling related to that. And there's some fascinating stories about, being in Poland while, you're reviewing effects shots or having the score beamed to you, or having two-way satellite communications with ILM and that kind of thing. So there's some fascinating production stories, but I couldn't tell it without also, getting into Schindler's List a bit, just to put it all in context.
Yeah, you kind of have to get into the headspace, because, that's a dark film, and so is The Lost World, so it kind of makes sense, that timeline in the process.
Right.
So you've worked on so many great titles, from Back to the Future, Jaws, Star Trek, Star Wars, obviously Jurassic Park. Do you feel like you come away as like an expert of these movies once you're done reviewing them or writing the liner notes like that?
I I don't know. Well, I guess, I mean, yeah. In all modesty, I mean, you could say expert has such a sort of an arrogant connotation, but I always feel like I'm still a student of these movies. I don't really like to use the word fan. You're really a student of something that you love. You're constantly learning from it and gaining enrichment from something that you love and care about. So I feel more like a sort of a kind of a keeper of the canon kind of thing, that it's that when we're all gone, there's a place to go to get the context and to get the music, of course, itself. And when I work on the music, I always come at it with the attitude that this might be the one time that somebody gets to work on this. So my job is to get it right. And again, that it exists, and for 100 years from now, when we're all gone, there's a place to go to hear all of Jurassic Park and read all about Jurassic Park and get that context, of the history and the moment in time in which it appeared. Because how else will people know about it other than doing what I had to do, which is hours and hours in a library researching it. Now I can kind of distill it to a booklet. And good friend of mine who runs the USC Cinema Television Library has often said that students will come in to research something, and over the years, particularly in the last 10, 15 years, will direct them to these soundtrack releases, because we do this work of actually going behind the scenes and getting the production stories sort of distilled. But so that's great. But actually, specifically with Jurassic Park, I didn't think that you could talk about the music unless you really knew, how the project itself came together, and how that genre and how dinosaurs on film were depicted in the decades prior, and tap into sort of the fascination that people have had with dinosaurs since the mid-19th century, when they started unearthing the bones and creating the museums and all that. So, again, it's all about context. So if you needed to have some kind of basic knowledge of all that, and that history had to be included, and this sort of ramp up for Jurassic Park's production to become what it did, and that real, important moment where they made the decision, we're going to do CG dinosaurs and get away with it. Without that context, you can't really appreciate what John Williams then did with the music. Because if you applied that music to half-baked visual effects that you would have done, say, in the 1970s, it never would have worked. No. It had to go hand in hand with the quality that was brought to it. And that is just as important as what Steven and George Lucas did when they made Raiders. And when George made the original Star Wars, he took these things that were B movie material, made them into A movies. So again, it's all about the context. You need to know where you came from in order to, really assess where you are and then where you're going.
Well, tell me a little bit about the inception of this specific project with the La La Land Records release. How did this come about for you?
It actually came about from John Williams' office when they made the deal to do the live-to-picture concerts. And I was told last year, or late last year, maybe a year ago, or perhaps early this year, 2016, that we've just made the deal to do Jurassic Park in concert. It's going to be debuting in London in November. Would La La Land like to do that as a release? And I said, well, of course they will. I said, the problem is there's not too much unreleased material from Jurassic Park, because in 2013 there was a digital download version that added some additional tracks at the end of previously unreleased music. So I said, well, could we do it with The Lost World as a combination of the two scores, since that has a ton of music that nobody's ever heard before.
Yeah.
And they just floated that by John, and then they checked with Steven if he'd be okay with it. He said yes. Because he directed both pictures and both had John Williams scores, that was going to work. So they approved it, and so then it was a matter of going to both Universal Studios for their part of it and to Universal Music Group, separate company, in New York for the license. And they okayed it, and then we were off and running. And so the goal was always to come out at the end of this year, timed with the premiere of the live to picture concert, which happened in London in early November.
Yeah, so I guess you do get to communicate slightly with John Williams and Steven about this, because they have to have their input about how this shows up, right? I know, isn't John pretty particular about how the track listing shows up and the way it's put out on an album?
Well, you mean when he initially creates a soundtrack album?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And he's very old school in that way, and in his mind, he probably still thinks of LPs and records, and that's the background he comes from with regard to albums. So he's thinking of, what makes the best listening experience, what's a representation of the score that's sort of suitable for the masses. And he's a very, very humble man. And, can't imagine that every note he puts on paper, is a work of genius, so he just goes for, what he thinks works in consultation with the, his music editor, and all of that. And of course, nowadays we are customarily, if it's a long score, we'll customarily get 65 or 70 minutes of music, which is generous, but, he is the greatest composer in film music history. Yeah. So, and has had, so many successes, and so therefore has a great following. And so on the big, huge hits like Jurassic Park, people want everything because the music instantly just creates a memory. And there are a generation of people for whom Jurassic Park was their Star Wars. For me, I kind of always scratch my head at that a little bit. Because I'm like, okay, by that time, we'd already gotten Jaws and Star Wars and Superman and Raiders and E.T., and when I hear people say, "Oh, Jurassic Park introduced me to film music and the greatness of John Williams," and I'm thinking, well, yeah, this was just kind of, it is great, but his methodology was well established by then, and and I'm like, but you have to respect that, and it's like you understand people that of a younger generation, that was the groundbreaking moment, and you have to honor that and capture that, and I think he did it again years later with the first Harry Potter.
Oh, definitely.
There's younger people for whom that was like they opened up their minds to what film music could do. So, but for those of us who were around when the first Star Wars opened, that I don't know how anything could possibly ever equal that. But but we do have these sort of benchmarks that do come along and change the landscape. And Jurassic Park is certainly one of them.
Yeah, I think it really depends on when you view something for the first time. For me, obviously, Star Wars is Star Wars. It's amazing and perfect, and it was Star Wars for a long time, obviously. But I at that point when I see Jurassic Park, I'm 7 years old, so it's really the first instance of a movie where I can kind of take it all in and appreciate things a little bit more. Obviously, Star Wars was huge before my time, and I appreciated those movies, but not in the same way. Like I couldn't get into the music as much or do any of that stuff at that time. But once Jurassic Park came around, then it's a whole new story, and then I'm like getting into the toys and everything. So I think it's all about when you experience these things, and like you said, Harry Potter does the same thing for younger people today.
Right.
So I guess you kind of summed it up in that one point that the reason we don't see a lot of these tracks and stuff, the unreleased stuff on prior material is because maybe John isn't fully comfortable with his with the stuff that he always creates, like every single note you said. Is that reason why, or is there anything else? Is it just because of that, or the ability to make a good listening process?
Well, again, he comes from background where from a time restricted era where you had an LP that was maybe, if you pushed it, 45 minutes. And you had to figure out, where do I break side A and switch to side B? Yeah. It blows my mind that, we're back to vinyl again. So, so, I mean, he comes from that background, and where it's like, okay, to repeat a track to complete the listening experience. Well, once we got into CDs and you could start programming, the order yourself, even to repeat stuff, it felt a little weird to have the same track on a disc twice. But it's a secondary component to him. John lives in the world of his pencil and his scoring paper, and then switches from the pencil to the baton. And has he done a good job, and are the musicians performing it well? That's the world where he lives in. Everything else he trusts to other people to do their job. So he'll have a hand in creating the initial album, obviously, but what will be in his mind are, the cues he particularly remembers of being happy with, that the orchestra performed well, that the scene is a memorable scene from the picture, and work that stuff out. Mm-hmm. Those of us who then have the particular antenna that tunes into the music when we watch a movie, if it's a major thing like a Star Wars movie, a light starts going off when you're hearing things that are not on the album and you want it. So, but it's a different hemisphere of the brain, if you will, that kind of kicks in to sort of the desirability to have that. John is maybe too close to it to see it, and it's just focused on what he perceives as, let's make something that's listenable, and not necessarily include what we might call creeping around music, or droning, and especially some scores that are not really melodically based, where it is a lot of droning. You don't necessarily need or want every minute. But John tends to write scores where everything, there's a sort of a faction of listeners and fans who just want to have the complete picture. Everything. They just want to know what he wrote, what he recorded, and have it all, if for historic purposes, if for nothing else, because we obviously now live in a world where everybody can make their own playlists anyway, and just because we put out a 110-minute score doesn't mean that an individual listener now can't go and make their own 45-minute playlist of all of their favorites. Mm-hmm. So we're in a world now where this idea of like sitting down and playing an album is sort of this archaic thought. But, now we're into customizing your own listening experience. So it's so all we can do is just like put everything out there, and then let the people who love it do whatever they like with it. But, if you leave something off, then you're not doing your job. And so conversations do have to happen where I have to just sort of explain and make my pitch of why this needs to be out. For example, when I did AI, artificial intelligence, I had to say, in order to do this right, it's got to be 3 CDs. I said, because we have the original album, and then this Academy promo was created that John's people did not approve. And it got submitted and then spread around, and then everybody had it. And I said, in order to make that obsolete and include everything on the original album, it has to be 3 discs. I know it's a tough sell, but look, this will devalue that Academy promo copies of still selling for a large amount on eBay, we can sort of devalue that and render it obsolete if we do a 3-disc set. And then they said, okay. So there's a lot of administrative concerns, and then the creative side, there are things that get questioned. But as we've done more of them, they've come to trust me to do it right. And that's what I feel like my job is.
Yeah, so I think when you get these two albums, you're like, all right, Jurassic Park, awesome, this is great. But it's not the white whale of this, this collection. I think that's The Lost World. There's 40 minutes of unreleased material for this? That's just crazy. Like, where has his music been all our lives?
Just sitting on tapes at Universal Studios.
Oh, that's heartbreaking. But I'm so glad we have it now, because this material is amazing. And like I said, this is the stuff that people have been wanting forever, because I believe that first album only had 14 tracks on it, right? And when you're listening to these or watching these movies, you're kind of picking up on these cues throughout the film, and you're like, oh, I don't have that on my album. I don't have this one. This one's missing too. Where is this stuff? So now we basically have, I guess, everything, right? So it's really awesome to finally hear all this unreleased stuff.
It's all there, and and it's an astounding score, really unlike anything else he's ever done. And and very, very daring move to do a sequel to Jurassic Park and take such a departure into a different direction. So because it's so easy, and not really using the original score and the themes from it as a crutch, but really just daring to be different. And so this package is clearly marked. This score is obviously takes place on on an island where you are going to be eaten and chased, and and it's relentless and it's merciless. And the orchestra just plays the hell out of it. So, it's quite revelatory, and a ton of music on there that didn't even get used. And we already knew about some of sections of the film where John recorded one thing, but then in the editorial process, they replaced it with something else. So now you actually get to hear his entire conception of the score as he originally intended it and recorded it. So it's really an exhausting experience, but it's so compelling to listen to, just the quality of the recording and just the complexity of the writing, and just the overall approach with this sort of the percussion and the jungle drums. Which just sort of brings a whole connotation to it. Again, sort of a memory of movies and stories of the past, kind of come back when you listen to it, and you're just, hearing, the top composer just attack that genre, and with these astounding results. It's just a magnetic listening experience to me.
Yeah, I think he really, really captures that adventure tone with the percussion and everything, and it is something that you don't hear very often from composers. So I think just everything about this score, and for some reason, I don't know why, but people just write this movie off, and the score itself even, but I just don't think they're diving into it the same way a lot of us are. So there's so much good stuff from this album, even the old one that we had, the 14 tracks or whatever. There's so much good stuff and iconic stuff, like the main adventure, theme for The Lost World. The way that captures that, it's just so iconic. That's one of my favorite ones, probably across the board throughout both of these films.
Yeah, honestly, it's more of the score that I would have wanted in the first Jurassic Park. Because, in all honesty, I, as a child, did not have the fascination with dinosaurs. So the reverence for dinosaurs that comes out in Jurassic Park didn't really affect me.
Okay.
Especially having read the book first, where it didn't feel like it had that tone. There was more a tone of fear about what had been done rather than reverence. John captured the reverence in the iconic scene where the Brachiosaurus is first revealed. But I was envisioning something darker, even in just based on reading the book. Mm-hmm. So they went for sort of a different tone in the movie, which was right for the movie, but it wasn't what I was expecting. And so when we got to this darker place with the Lost World, I really loved it, and I agree with you. The main theme, the Lost World, is just ingenious. It's kind of the basic structure is simple, but it's extremely complex. The way that it's then arranged and where it goes, and very difficult for the musicians to even play with some of these odd rhythms and beats and syncopations and things like that. But I know that there was a thought about once again opening the album with it this time around, because it's not the first thing that you hear in the movie.
Yeah.
But because we had an alternative version of it, it made sense so that we didn't have two versions of it close together. But at the same time, you really need to put on this CD and be instantly told this is a completely different approach. This is not Jurassic Park. It's a different island. And again, as I said, it immediately tells you, yes, there's adventure here, but it's much more dangerous, and you're in much, much less control. And as the film says, no fences this time. So right out of the gate, the music tells you that, and I think that's best achieved by opening the album with that track.
Yeah, if you had started with the island's voice, it would have been a much, slower, softer introduction. You wouldn't have gotten that, you wouldn't have hyped it up as much if you had started that way.
Right. You're not clear where you're going.
Mm-hmm. Which is good with the movie.
Right.
Mm-hmm. I do really love that alternate take of the Lost World theme. Just something about the pounding in the beginning of that. I really love the alternate version of that.
Yeah, that aggressive brass starting right out the gate.
Yes, that's what it is. Yeah.
As of the original version is what I call it sounds like I call it the Lawrence of Arabia beginning. Sounds like that. So.
Yeah, there's so many good aspects of this new album here, and I like one of the aspects I do like is that you do split up a lot of these tracks that were kind of all synced together at one point, like the incident at Isla Nublar. So when you have that on the original one, it's like it goes from scene to scene to scene. So it is actually kind of confusing as you're listening to it on the original score. So I like that stuff like that is broken up, and even the tranquilizer dart, I believe. I like that these all have their own endings now, and they're kind of a complete track in themselves.
Well, I try to, you have to think of. There's a lot of factors that go into something like that. On the end, the sort of the end user part of it is that you want to give people flexibility to put together their own playlist and how they'd like it. Mm-hmm. On the front end of it is the creative approach. And I will tell you that on Jurassic Park, I was asked, can we keep that album track, Incident at Isla Nublar, as it was on the album to give it a good bang opening, which of course segued into The Falling Car.
Yeah.
And because it felt that, that track, The Falling Car on its own, didn't work as a standalone track, which I originally had it where it is, where in sequence. Mm-hmm. So, and I said, well, if you insist, I said, but again, and I have to go to, I got to, go toe to toe with John's people on this and say, well, but, we really will be taken to the mat for that if we do that. And then the rest of the score is chronological.
Yeah.
I do musically and in terms of listening experience, see your point. But it's the kind of thing that's antithetical to what we're trying to do here. So the response was, okay, well, then would you be able to put The Falling Car together in the same track with the T-Rex chase?
Mhm.
And I said, yes, okay, that will work. So that's the compromise. So now at least we kept the chronology, but the falling car has something else within its track that it goes onto, and there are consecutive cues in the film and consecutive scenes in the film, consecutive, so that all work together. But then, you get into the situation that I might not have been able to do that had it not been for the 2013 Geffen download release, which was the first time that the T-Rex chase was made available, albeit without the ending of the queue. So,
yeah.
And then you get into this administrative thing where you have who owns what. So all of the content of the original album, which was on MCA Records, is controlled by Universal Music Group, and which is not part of the same company as Universal Studios is. So Universal Studios would own all of the masters and retain the rights to the unreleased music, but they don't have the rights to put them out themselves because the record company, Universal Music Group, has what we call the phono rights. So if you run into a problem if you try to combine a previously released track with a previously unreleased track within the same new track. So then there's an administrative issue.
Yeah.
So what ended up happening is that the assembly actually changed because, for example, I had the track Hatching Baby Raptor then go into the next queue, which was You Bred Raptors, which has never been released until now. And Universal Music Group said, if you do that, then Universal Studios has to assign the mechanical rights to Universal Music Group for that queue. So in order to avoid that and to allow NBC Universal to keep those mechanical rights, I separated those. So administrative stuff comes into it. So I was only able to combine the falling car with the T-Rex chase as one track because the T-Rex chase had been released 3 years ago by Geffen. And so the whole thing was already with Universal Music Group anyway. Yeah. We were just constituting a new version of it, which you call a derivative work, but it was a derivative work of things they already had the rights to. So all these crazy administrative things crop up, and it's very, very difficult. It's much more complex than people realize. It takes to actually reassemble these scores in order. And when you're dealing with something being owned by more than one entity. So in The Lost World, we have the track Rescuing Sarah, which was truncated by about a minute on the original album. And so in order to create this, first of all, we have to retitle it. So we have to call it Extended Version because so that it doesn't get confused with the track already in the system with the same title. Mm-hmm. And then that extra minute, because it's in the middle of a previously released track, NBC Universal had to concede the mechanical rights over to Universal Music Group, so they now own it and have the ability to release it. So it's extremely complicated. So much administrative, things go on. It's not just a matter of I get the music, assemble it, and it's done. There's all of this administration and calculating minutes and seconds, and use released music versus unreleased music, of timing how many measures the choir is singing. It's there's a lot of administration that goes into making this work.
Seriously, that's the stuff you don't think about.
Yeah, it's very, very complex with these, with the fact that the La La Land is licensing from two entities, and and that's necessary, and that's what's made these labels work. Is that only a third party can really come in and do this, because the license holders, don't really license to each other. So a third party can come in and say, okay, well, I'll take this material from you, this material from you, and now I have a license for all of it, and we can assemble it and put the composer's original score back together, in chronological order. Mm-hmm. But it's not a simple process administratively at all.
Yeah, I'm sure. I can't believe that. That's so much work you got to do, and a lot of chess pieces to move around to make sure you assemble this in a great order. And whether it's a 40-second track or 5 minutes, it's so great that we finally have this Lost World stuff. Like I was just like, I was shocked to see this release come about, and the fact that we're getting it, because it's kind of something I've always wanted, and a lot of people have been saying the exact same thing.
Have you played it in your car?
Oh, of course, yeah.
It's great. Drive to.
Yes, that's one of the things, like with this whole adventure tone and everything, that's one of the things that you could put it on, like, say you're taking a hike or you're driving your car, like it's the perfect soundtrack for that.
Yeah.
So newly released tracks aside, what makes this album different from the previous releases, I guess through the remastering process?
Well, Jurassic Park, the half-inch stereo masters of the scoring masters were transferred actually in 2013 for the Geffen download release at very high resolution. And Ramiro Belgar, who's John's music editor, recreated the original album from that, and then took a selection of cues that were not on the original album and combined them together for a few bonus tracks at the end of previously unreleased material. Mm-hmm. So I actually was just given that Ramiro's sessions. So nothing new had to be transferred. It had just been done in 2013, and all of the editing had been done already. I did go and check it out and put it up against the original album and against the sound from the picture itself. And did slide a few things here and there so that I could get it 100% accurate. But most of the time, it was fine. There were also instances in 2013 where he grabbed a piece of a different take in order to cover up a stage noise or something like that, even though the version with the noise was used on the original album and in the film. But he's a music editor, and I come from more of the background of restoration, and and told him that, well, there's more ways to deal with noise than just choosing another take. So we actually go in and take out the noise. And so I did that with maybe one or two exceptions. Mm-hmm. I just kind of used the work that he had done as a basis for this new assembly, and then paid pretty close attention to what Patricia Sullivan, who did the mastering on it, did in 2013, and kind of stayed in that ballpark for Jurassic Park. So, that was pretty easy. It was great to work with the high resolution material of it and to hear all the original sessions and the chit chat and all the alternate takes. And, and I thought I would search through everything for maybe other tracks that we didn't know about, alternate versions. But there weren't any. For whatever reason, either that, everybody was focused on getting on to the next project. Stephen was on to Schindler's List. And he obviously was very focused on that. Yeah. Or that they just nailed it. They just nailed it and didn't have the usual situation where we have two or three alternates or versions of cues that are completely different from the final versions. They just nailed it. And any decisions they made to make a change were just done editorially, such as tracking in the sort of island adventure theme when the T-Rex makes his Twinkle Toes T-Rex, comes in at the end of the picture. Yeah. But, they did that editorially rather than going back and recording inserts or replacement cues, whatever, on both scores. They didn't do that. They just moved on to the next projects. So, anyway, so on Jurassic Park, I had that as the starting point, which was great for La La Land as well because they didn't have to pay for the transfers. However, I will tell you a little bit of an aside here in that I've also started to get involved in some of the live to picture concerts that are, and on Jurassic Park, I said, do you want me to check the multi-tracks to see if I can get you just the synthesizers for Dennis Steals the Embryo so that the orchestra can play the acoustic stuff and the synth can be just, embedded.
Yeah.
And they said, well, it's a thought. We actually were considering revoicing it for orchestra. And they said, but we also we're not planning on bringing a choir in for this because they really don't have that much to do. A little bit at the beginning,
standing around,
right, and then the very end. I mean, it's a long stretch. It's not like on Home Alone, which is great because they come in just for the second half. I said, well, I could check that out, and they said the other thing is the shakuhachi flute, which is in just 2 cues. It would save us some money if we had that. Can you check that out? So I said, okay. Now I didn't need the multi-track for the project, but it all exists there at Universal. So they had it called in, and we isolated the reels that I needed to check out. And they said these tapes are shedding.
Oh.
So,
no.
Which happened with analog tape, but
Yeah.
it was a shock, that the multi-tracks from 1993 were succumbing to this. So they said we need to bake the reels. So they baked the reels. They played fine. And the choir, unfortunately, was too much married to the orchestra. They were not discreet. So they ended up with a synth choir for the concerts. But the shakuhachi flute was pretty clean. So I was able to extract that, and it's for Dennis Steals the Embryo, and I think just the opening titles. So I actually gave them just those clean things, and they sampled them and created a sort of programmable synth. So at that moment, while it's being performed in concert, when the music comes up to that point, somebody just presses a button, and the actual shakuhachi flute from the original recording plays. So, awesome. but I had said, okay, when you order in elements, everything has to stay together. Even if you know what you're looking for, I said, if I just need reel 3, well, sorry, but if it's a 35 reel set, all 35 rolls have to be moved. Everybody stays together. So I said, well, since these are here, and since you've told me that these are shedding, do you think that maybe it might be a good idea to actually transfer everything and save this? So they had some internal conversations and came back to me saying, yes, we have talked internally and have found the budget to go ahead and do this. So because of that search for something from the concert, something that we needed for the concert, they were able to just transfer all of the multi-track on Jurassic Park and digitize all of it.
Wow.
So, so again, that's just my rude awakening, to that whole thing goes back to the time when Jurassic Park was first made, when I first started getting into all of this and found out this phenomenon that stuff just will go away. If you don't maintain it or transfer or back it up or take care of it, it just goes away. It doesn't matter how important it is or how successful it was. It's, it's organic material and it will degrade.
Yeah.
So because of the concert, we found that out about the Jurassic Park multi-track, and it all got saved. Because, I know they did a 3D conversion. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if they tweaked the soundtrack for that at all. But let's just say somebody comes along in 7-8 years and says, hey, let's do a new Atmos mix of Jurassic Park. Let's call in the multi-track so we can do the multi-channel music and whatever, and oops, it's gone.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
So,
yeah.
I mean, this is why stuff has to be taken care of. And on the Lost World, the same thing was true of the half-inch stereo scoring masters. They were going. They were wobbly. They were dropping out. They were not playing. Can you believe it? From 1997. So,
wow, really?
Yeah. So they have a 1-inch. They had a 1-inch masters, which had Sean Murphy's 5.1 mixes on it, and then stereo on it as well. So I ended up using that as the source, and it's an amazing recording.
It really is.
And I think that they kind of went conservative in the 90s for doing the initial CDs, because that's where we were at the time. We were barely a decade into having CDs. And so nobody really knew how far you could take digital technology. Nobody knew what kind of playback equipment would be coming up in the future, or what listening environments people would be in. So there was a conservativeness to the earlier era of digital music, because people were still just kind of plugging them into their old stereos from the 70s. And, if you went too far with something, you just blow them. So,
yeah.
But now I was able to kind of let the full breadth of the original recording just come alive in both cases. So they're probably among Sean's finest recordings. And then what I have to do on The Lost World, I actually had to recreate all of the performance edits. So I will listen to the original album. I will listen to the movie. I will have the printed scores. Sometimes the orchestrator will actually write the takes on it of where stuff changes. And you have logs that will tell you the circle takes, and that tells you where to start. But John tends to do a lot of intercutting, where you'll be, take number 47 will be used as the master, but there'll be intercuts where you'll have 2 measures from 45 and 3 measures from 48. And, and sometimes it's to do with hitting the timing just right for what's happening on the screen, and other times it's performances. But I had to recreate all of that actually from scratch.
Wow.
So, and I love doing that. It's a tremendous learning process of actually, learning, okay, to figure out what are you listening for that makes this right, but not that take. And really the process that, the music editors go through to nail that. And, and what is the conductor hearing? What is the orchestrator hearing? That leads to these decisions of how to assemble a cue. The digital technology is great because you can't tell when the intercuts are happening. In the old days, when you were just cutting mag and splicing, some of these analog edits are just these sound like holes you can drive a truck through. So it's always fun to work with the technology. And to just also learn just from the creative standpoint and study what they were doing, and the fascination of the whole process.
Man, that's incredible. It's so cool to hear all these, behind the scenes stories, and to think about all those edit points and stuff that you had to deal with. That's a lot of work, just knowing, like, from editing the podcast itself, I'm always doing stuff, but that doesn't compare anything to this. So I can imagine how hard it is and how much work you have to do to get that right.
You really your head goes into a zone where you sort of live in there. And, you live in I literally feel like I'm living in the Sony scoring stage. Acoustically, you're in that environment. That's sometimes why I hate going from doing multiple projects at a time, because like once your head and your ears tune into the room of the score that you're working on, you need to keep it there. If you switch to something else, something recorded later or decades earlier, or your head has to go to a different place. Then you have to come back. And it could be changed by, after lunch when you've eaten, things sound different than they did in the morning. I mean, there's a lot of science to it. And but we're all there, but we're human beings. And so it's like, it's not scientifically measurable process that we're doing. There's an aesthetic human component to it. So, all these things get factored in. But then there's also cases where I have music that's not in the film. I then have to, but I might have multiple takes of it and have to figure out, how to present it. So I then get to become sort of the music editor on it. I will do things like listen to the chit chat between John and the orchestra that usually precedes or follows every take. Sometimes I'll get a clue there, and they'll say, "Could we just go back and we need to get measure 20 better?" So I'm I'll listen to measure 20 in that next take and see what they did, so sometimes that illuminates things, and then just listening very, very carefully to the performance for any misplayed notes or any beats that are off or anything like that, and just listen more carefully than we usually do.
Yeah.
To just see, okay, well, what does the music say, and how are they playing, and if we need to do any intercutting, how will I do that to create the best performance? So that's fun stuff when that stuff comes along. I mean, I was really surprised to find how much Lost World material wasn't used in the movie. Maybe good, 10 or 15 minutes. The whole sequence where they got the baby T-Rex in the trailer, was scored all the way through. Or when they're up in the high hide and you just see the trees moving, the T-Rex. Don't see it, just the trees move. That was all scored. So, I mean, to line that up to picture is always fun.
Oh, I love doing that. Yeah, that's always fun to see how the cues work hand in hand with the film.
And in fact, for any listeners who subscribe to Film Score Monthly online, we've prepared 2 score restores for the December issue, which should be announced, I don't know, in the next week or so, of Jurassic Park, the cues Goat Bait and the Saboteur, which, by the way, was not the original title of that unused cue. The original title was The Menace Dennis. Yeah. But and Goat Bait is interesting. It's the first Tyrannosaur paddock sequence where the T-Rex does not show up.
Yeah.
And John scored that entire scene. And I had first put it up while I was working on it to just look at it and study, and I realized, boy, was it right to take it out.
For sure.
It does work. It does work with it, and you'll see it totally works with it. But that was shot exterior in Kauai, and the actual roadside attack in the rain was done at Warner Brothers on a soundstage, later recreating that little area. Mm-hmm. Which is, of course, the sort of the centerpiece, memorable moment about the first movie. Mm-hmm. And just psychologically, the absence of music makes the nighttime scene even more realistic and terrifying. For whatever reason, and this is the kind of strange psychological impact that music, or the absence of music, has on the audience. Most of it happens subconsciously, and I remembered very, very vividly from opening day of the picture the moment that I also talked about in the notes, where when the T-Rex road attack ends, and we cut to Samuel Jackson talking about how Nedry hacked the computer systems or what he did, and music starts there. Mm-hmm. And I just remember all of the gasps and the murmuring and the kind of nervous laughter in the audience. And I realized in studying the picture again, that it's like the music tells you it's okay to take a breath now.
Yeah, really.
Because that was just a harrowing 10-minute sequence that is not scored. And we'd never seen anything, like that. So to then say it's so good it doesn't need music, just talks about that speaks to what a great sequence it is. And then when it got to the Lost World, I think they found the same thing again, that when they're in the trailer, these mechanical T-Rex heads moving along the side, the imagery is so powerful that it doesn't need the music, so they took it out. Mm-hmm. And they kept it for when Sarah hits the pane of glass. Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of I'm the beneficiary of a lot of kind of film music study as I work on these things, and it's great fun.
Yeah, like you just talked about, I think that is one of the essential things about these movies is the time it gives you to relax and just to take in the sound of the scene, and that's one of the things that always stands out to fans of this franchise. And I think with some films today, sometimes there's just either too much music, too many sound effects, dialogue, all crammed in to one small scene. So the fact that these movies took the time to have those gaps with no music, while the music is obviously amazing and some of the best, it's nice to have that time where you can just hear the jungle sounds and feel the terror kind of creep up on you.
Right, because music can't say anything unless it's absent.
Yeah,
and I think I also included the little story in the liner notes about Hitchcock and Bernard Herrmann and North by Northwest.
Oh yes.
And about scoring the crop duster sequence. So I mean, which ended up not needing music. So it's and that's kind of like the Jurassic Park's equivalent moment, is that centerpiece iconic thing that we think of, in North by Northwest is that scene. But you needed the audience to just have that sound of the airplane. If you added music over to it, you are lessening the impact.
Yeah.
So the same thing. I mean, and the sound design, of course, in Jurassic Park is still phenomenal. As is the CG. I mean, that stands up still all these years later as among the most convincing CG, particularly The Lost World.
Oh yeah.
It's highly underrated CG work there. It's really just it's incredible. In terms of feeling like the computer generated element is actually occupying physical space, very hard thing to do. And even when I look at a lot today, that's what I always feel like. I don't feel like the light is actually hitting the object in space. Or I never feel like daylight is really, really daylight. So, but in the Lost World, they really particularly nailed it. When I looked at it again, I'm like, this is just unbelievably phenomenal work. There's a cohesion to the imagery that's astounding. But the sound design, yeah, and of course, on the first Jurassic Park, Sean Murphy, who recorded the music, was also one of the sound effects editors or sound mixing team. And got his Oscar for being part of that team. So they had the benefit of the guy who recorded the score also working on the sound design, so that one would not compete with the other, that they would have sort of a happy marriage and just the right balance. And John had also, gone up to Skywalker Ranch before he recorded the score to listen to the sound design that they were doing and make sure that he could write a score that would not compete with it, but would just kind of complement it. And composers have done this forever, where they'll look at the scene and realize that, a high-pitched wind is blowing, so I'll do something very low in the orchestra, or a man with a deep voice is talking, and so you can do something in the higher end of the orchestra so that you don't compete, but that the entire everything in the sound field can kind of come through. So there was a lot of technical care on the Jurassic Park movies that really comes through, and that it's just a perfect combination of all the different branches of the artistry, the cinematography, the editing, the scoring, the sound design, all of that just came together so well.
So moving on to that, how did you feel about Michael Giacchino's work in Jurassic World? Do you think he blended well with the new and the old?
Yeah, I mean, I liked how he used John's themes at the appropriate moments. And it's a real fun. It's a rather harrowing movie, but the music is kind of fun, and there's a little bit of tongue in cheekness to it, but it's a rousing adventure score. So I thought he did good. He's a really great composer and a great guy.
What's your take on the scene later on in the film? Blue, gets, pushed off to the side, but later comes back to save the day kind of and runs back in slow motion. And you get that little cue from the Lost World. What do you think about that? Why is that kind of thrown in there at the last second?
I don't know. We'd have to ask him. I don't know that anybody has. But I think he just wanted to acknowledge where he came from and where this came from. And early in his career, he did music for a Lost World video game.
Yeah.
So I think that just shows the loyalty he has and the recognition of the background, and to just work in that little bit of continuity.
Yeah, I hope he comes back because he's a great composer. He's perfect for this. Obviously, he's a busy guy and is working on, he just finished up Star Wars. So I'm really, really excited to hear Rogue One's score.
Yeah, I think some of it's been previewed, and I haven't listened to any of it at all. So, but I'll be seeing it Tuesday.
Yeah. Oh, nice. Wow, early. I'm waiting until Thursday.
Tonight's the premiere, and and all these street closures in Hollywood. It's insane. I actually don't know why they're doing it at the Pantages, but they are, which is not really set up as a movie theater.
Oh no.
Back in the day, but it's for Broadway shows. So so I can't quite figure that out. But anyway, that's where they're having the premiere.
That's awesome because I saw that they got an X-wing down there on the streets and they've giant red carpets and everything. So that's got to be an amazing thing. I think it's streaming tonight, so I'll probably watch it.
Yeah, it's cool.
From what I've been hearing, Jurassic Park 3 might be on the list for La La Land Records in the future. Is that something you'd look to work on?
I would love to work on it, but I actually have not heard it mentioned. But it's certainly worth considering. I don't know. I have the album. I don't know. It's a very short movie.
Yes, yeah, it's only an hour and a half.
Which I probably like better than most people, because maybe because it's short. It's just in and out quickly.
Yes,
and has some interesting things in it. And as with The Lost World, it takes the opportunity to present some things from the Crichton's original novel that the first movie didn't. I don't really have a problem with the film that a lot of people have. But as being only 83 minutes or something like that, I don't know how much more music there is to do for it.
Yeah, and that's always the point of contention, people comparing Don Davis's score to John Williams and how they, interwork with each other. I think he did a good job. Sometimes relied maybe too much on John Williams stuff, but there is some really, really good stuff in that score.
Yeah, I like it as well.
So before I take up way too much of your time, where can people, or what can people look forward to seeing from you in the future?
Well, I haven't. I think I should just if I
keep it simple.
If I didn't say it before, soundtrack buyers do have an expensive hobby, and I'm very, very grateful that they exist and that they support all these efforts. I will, just advise John Williams fans to save some money. For particularly over the next year or so.
Nice.
There are a lot of things happening, and I'm very fortunate in that I've done a lot that have been for Stephen and Amblin, and that we are looking into others. And but there's a lot of really good things coming up that I'm just thrilled to be working on. Awesome.
So where can everybody find you online?
Well, gosh, I do have a website, MikeMatessino.com. It's been grossly neglected. It's there. Recently I've kind of distanced myself a bit from social media. There's just been things going on, and I've just been really, really busy. But I'm accessible and reachable. So I would just say go to that website If you need to contact me, I have an email address there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And hopefully, maybe some of these other scores, Jurassic Park 3 or Jurassic World, come, down the pike sometime in the future, and maybe we can have you back to talk about it.
That'd be great. I do have to say that I do enjoy hearing from the collectors and from the fans, who, again, I prefer to think of as students, but not mine, but students of the thing that they love. Because that's the most satisfying part of it for me, is not that I get to work on it. It's that it actually gets out there to people who care about it and love it and get to enjoy it. And I get to sort of share in that knowledge that it's out there. We all have it. And myself as a fan and a student, have it alongside them, and that we're sort of all in this together. That I'm very, very happy to sort of be on the front lines, fighting to have projects happen and have them done correctly. And I'm very, very grateful that I get to be the one to work on them.
Well, yeah, I think a big thank you from everybody in the fan community for basically any film franchise that you've worked on. It's a big thank you from us, because we really appreciate all the work and energy you put into this project. So thank you very much for this and for coming on the show.
Okay, thanks, Brad. Pleasure.
Are you hearing this?
Make sure to visit JurassicParkPodcast.com to find all of our past episodes, brand new news articles, information on how to contact us, and much more. It's a great source for everything related to the podcast, and of course Jurassic Park and Jurassic World. Head to JurassicParkPodcast.com and help us build a great community.
Anybody hear that?
5 minutes. Drop what you're doing and leave now.